My name is Mara Ellis, and I'm 33 years old. I grew up in Beaufort, South Carolina, in a small white house behind my parents' seafood restaurant, Ellis Harbor Grill. If you've never lived near the coast, you might not understand how a place can smell like salt water, old wood, fried shrimp, and family history all at the same time. That restaurant was not fancy. The blue paint on the front door was always peeling. One of the ceiling fans clicked every time it turned, and the wooden sign outside had been faded by sun and storms for as long as I could remember. But to my father, Raymond Ellis, it was everything. He built half of it with his own hands. To my mother, Lillian, it was her kingdom. She ran that kitchen like a woman commanding a ship through rough waters. And to me, it was the place where I learned how invisible a daughter could be while standing right in front of everyone. My older sister, Tessa, was 2 years older than me, and somehow, from the day she learned to talk, the whole family acted like she had been born with a spotlight above her head. Tessa was beautiful in an easy way, with golden brown hair, a bright laugh, and the kind of charm that made people forgive her before she even finished making excuses. If she broke a glass, people laughed and called her clumsy in a cute way. If I broke one, Mom sighed and told me to pay attention. If Tessa forgot to show up for a shift at the restaurant, Dad said she had a creative spirit that couldn't be boxed in. If I was 5 minutes late after school because I stayed behind to help a teacher, Dad would tap his watch and ask if I thought the world waited for me. I became the quiet daughter because there was no room to be anything else. While Tessa entertained relatives at Sunday dinners, I cleared plates. While she sat on the counter telling stories, I wiped down tables. While Dad bragged about her big personality, I sat beside the register adding receipts because Mom trusted me with numbers. But trust is not the same as praise. Responsibility is not the same as love. For years, I confused being useful with being seen. When I got a scholarship to study hospital administration in Seattle, I thought maybe my parents would finally be proud. I remember standing in the kitchen with the acceptance letter in my hand, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Mom read it first. She smiled, but it was a small smile, careful and tired. Dad barely looked at the paper before handing it back to me. Then he said, "Seattle is far. Guess you always wanted to get away from us." That sentence stayed with me longer than any congratulations would have. I wanted to tell him that leaving didn't mean abandoning them. I wanted to tell him that I had spent my whole childhood trying to earn a place in that family, and maybe distance was the only way I could stop begging for one. But I didn't say any of that. I folded the letter, went to my room, and cried quietly into a pillow so nobody would hear. I left Beaufort with 2 suitcases, a used laptop, and $412 in my checking account. For the first few years, I called home every Sunday night. Sometimes Mom answered. Dad almost never did. Tessa always sounded amused when I asked how they were doing. "They're busy, Mara," she would say. "Don't make everything about you." So I stopped asking why they didn't call me first. I sent birthday cards. I mailed Christmas gifts. I ordered Mom a blue ceramic mixing bowl after she mentioned hers had cracked. I sent Dad a new set of restaurant-grade knives because I knew he would never buy them for himself. Nobody thanked me. When I asked Tessa if the gifts arrived, she said, "I think so. You know how they are." And somehow, I accepted that. I told myself love didn't need a receipt. Then Hurricane Eta hit the coast. I was working late at the hospital when I saw the first news alerts: heavy rain, coastal flooding, wind damage, power outages across Beaufort County. I called my mother 3 times, no answer. I called Dad, no answer. I called Tessa. She texted back 2 hours later, "They're fine. Stop panicking." But something in me didn't settle. The next morning, Uncle Calvin called. He was my father's younger brother, and unlike most people in our family, he didn't decorate the truth before handing it to you. "Mara," he said, his voice rough, "the restaurant took a bad hit." I stepped out into the hospital stairwell, where nobody could see my face change. He told me part of the roof had peeled back like a sardine can. The storage room had flooded. The electrical panel was ruined. 2 freezers full of seafood were gone. Insurance would cover some of it, but not enough. My parents had already been behind on a business loan, and now there was a repair lien, too. If they didn't catch up, they could lose Ellis Harbor Grill, maybe even the house behind it. I asked him, "Does Tessa know?" There was a pause. Then he said, "She told them she's handling it." But the way he said it told me everything. That night, I sat at my little kitchen table in Seattle with my laptop open and my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I never drank. I called the bank the next morning. I explained who I was, confirmed what I could, and arranged the first payment from my own account. Anonymous. Direct. Quiet. $1,950 a month. At first, I thought it would be temporary. Just until they got back on their feet. Just until the restaurant reopened. Just until the storm became a memory instead of a threat. But 1 month became 6. 6 became 12. I stopped taking vacations. I sold my car and took the bus. I worked extra shifts until my feet ached so badly I soaked them in cold water at midnight. When friends invited me out, I said I was tired. When coworkers asked why I never bought lunch, I said I liked cooking at home. The truth was, every spare dollar I had was going back to Beaufort, to the restaurant that raised me and the parents who barely spoke my name. I didn't tell them because I didn't want gratitude forced by guilt. I didn't tell Tessa because some part of me already knew she would twist it. I only told Uncle Calvin, and I made him promise to keep quiet. For almost 2 years, I believed I was doing something pure. Painful, yes, but pure. I thought love could stay hidden and still matter. Then Uncle Calvin called me one evening, and his voice was colder than I had ever heard it. "Mara," he said, "you need to know what your sister is doing." And before he even finished the sentence, I felt my stomach drop. Uncle Calvin didn't ease into it. That was never his way. He didn't dress bad news in soft words or walk around the truth hoping I would guess it before he had to say it. He simply took a breath and said, "Tessa has been telling everyone she's the one saving the restaurant." For a moment, I didn't understand. I was standing in my Seattle apartment with my phone pressed to my ear, one hand still on the kitchen counter, my work shoes kicked off by the door. Outside my window, rain slid down the glass in thin silver lines, and for some reason, I remember staring at those lines like they might help me make sense of what he had just said. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. Uncle Calvin's voice got lower. "She told your father she's been making the payments. She told your mother she's been sacrificing everything to keep Ellis Harbor Grill open. Last Sunday, your dad raised a toast to her in front of half the family." But I sat down slowly because my knees didn't feel steady anymore. My father had raised a toast to Tessa. I could picture it perfectly. Dad standing near the long table in the restaurant, paper cup in hand, his voice full of pride, my mother wiping her eyes, Tessa pretending to be humble while soaking in every bit of attention like sunlight. I asked Uncle Calvin exactly what Dad had said, and he hesitated just long enough to make me regret asking. Then he told me. He said, "To Tessa, the daughter who stayed when it mattered." The words landed so hard I had to close my eyes. The daughter who stayed. I was 29 then, working 10-hour days, picking up weekend shifts, eating noodles and eggs because nearly $2,000 left my account every month before I could even breathe. I was keeping my parents' restaurant alive from across the country, and they were standing in that same restaurant thanking my sister for my sacrifice. I wanted to call home that night. I wanted to scream so loudly that every person sitting in Ellis Harbor Grill would hear my voice through the walls. I wanted to ask my father how he could believe Tessa had suddenly become responsible with money when she had never kept a job longer than 8 months. I wanted to ask my mother why she never wondered how her oldest daughter could pay thousands toward a loan while still buying designer bags and posting photos from rooftop bars in Charleston. But I didn't call. I sat there with the phone in my hand after Uncle Calvin hung up, staring at my banking app, scrolling through every payment like the numbers might defend me. They didn't. Numbers don't comfort you. They just prove the size of what you've lost. After that, everything Tessa posted online felt like a slap. She started writing captions about loyalty, sacrifice, and family. She posted a photo of herself standing in front of the repaired restaurant sign with the caption, "Some of us know what it means to show up." Underneath it, cousins commented with hearts. Aunt Denise wrote, "Your parents are lucky to have you." Mom commented, "Our blessing." Dad didn't use social media much, but I knew he saw it because Tessa would screenshot his text messages and share them too. One of them said, Proud of you, Tess. Couldn't have done this without you. I stared at that message for a long time. I had never seen those words from him. Not when I graduated, not when I got promoted, not when I moved across the country alone and built a life out of nothing. Proud of you belonged to Tessa. Debt belonged to me. The worst part was not just that she took the credit, it was what she did with it. Once my parents believed she had saved the restaurant, Tessa became untouchable. She started handling invoices. Then she convinced Dad to add her name to the business account so she could help manage cash flow. She changed suppliers without asking Mom. She took over the restaurant's social media and began calling herself operations manager, even though Uncle Calvin said she still showed up late and left early. At family dinners, she sat beside Dad like a partner instead of a daughter. When relatives asked about me, she gave little sighs and said things like, "Mara has her own life now," or "We all make choices." Nobody heard the poison in it because she served it with a smile. Meanwhile, I kept paying. Month after month, $1,950 left my account and crossed the country quietly. The loan balance went down. The lien disappeared. The restaurant stayed open. My parents kept their home behind it, and I kept shrinking my own life to make room for theirs. My fiancé Noah figured it out before I told him. He noticed I stopped driving rideshares and started taking 2 buses to work. He noticed I cut my own hair over the bathroom sink. He noticed the spreadsheet on my laptop, the one where I tracked every payment, every extra shift, every grocery receipt. One night, he sat across from me at our tiny kitchen table and said, "It's your parents, isn't it?" I tried to lie. I really did. But my face gave me away. He didn't call me foolish. He didn't tell me to stop. He just reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Then we make sure you don't disappear while saving them." I loved him for that. Still, there were days I wondered if I already had. By the 4th year, the debt was nearly gone. I had paid $94,680 in total toward the business loan, repairs, back taxes, and the last of the storm damage. The restaurant was stable again. The roof was new, the sign was repainted, and customers had started calling it a comeback story. Tessa stood in every photo of that comeback. I stood in none. Then one Thursday evening, I was scrolling through Facebook during a break at the hospital when I saw a post that made my chest tighten. It was from my cousin Paige. She had tagged several family members by mistake, including me. The post said, "Can't wait to celebrate Uncle Raymond and Aunt Lillian's 42nd anniversary this Saturday at Ellis Harbor Grill. Hosted by Tessa. Family only, going to be beautiful. Family only, hosted by Tessa." And nobody had invited me. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. There were already dozens of comments. Aunt Denise was bringing banana pudding. Cousin Marcus was bringing his guitar. Someone asked if the anniversary cake would have blue flowers like my parents' wedding. Mom replied with 3 heart emojis. I waited for my phone to ring. It didn't. I waited for a message from my mother saying there had been a mistake. Nothing came. I called Tessa that night. She answered on the 5th ring with that sugary voice she used when she wanted to sound innocent. "Mara, wow, this is a surprise." I said, "I saw the anniversary post." Silence. Then she laughed softly. "Oh, that? I didn't think you'd want to come." I said, "They're my parents." Her voice cooled. "They're also tired, Mara. Dad doesn't need any emotional surprises right now." I asked her what kind of emotional surprise she meant. She sighed like I was exhausting her. "You showing up after years away and making everyone uncomfortable." Something in me went still. Not calm, not peaceful. Still, like the second before glass breaks. I said, "I'll be there." Tessa's mask slipped. "Mara, don't do this. Don't turn Mom and Dad's night into one of your little silent victim performances." I looked around my apartment, at the used couch, the unpaid bills stacked by the microwave, the work shoes waiting by the door for another double shift. Then I said, "No, Tessa, you don't get to turn my absence into your crown anymore." I hung up before she could answer. The next morning, I called the bank and requested everything, every payment record, every account transfer, the final loan satisfaction letter, the lien release, the tax receipts. I wanted my name on every page because my name had been missing from the story long enough. When the documents arrived, I spread them across the kitchen table and looked at 4 years of my life printed in black ink. Then I wrote my parents a letter. I told them I never left because I stopped loving them. I told them I had been there in the only way I knew how. I told them I never needed applause, but I had needed a place at the table. I folded the letter, placed it with the documents, and put everything inside a navy blue box tied with a silver ribbon. Blue was their wedding color. Silver was for 42 years. And as I packed my suitcase for South Carolina, I finally understood something I should have known years earlier. The truth doesn't become cruel just because someone is embarrassed when it comes out. I flew into Charleston on a Saturday morning with the navy blue box tucked under my arm like it was something fragile enough to break if I breathed wrong. The entire flight, I kept my thumb pressed against the silver ribbon, smoothing it over and over until the edge of it started to curl. I told myself I was not going there to fight. I was not going there to embarrass anyone. I was going there to give my parents the truth, wrapped as gently as I knew how. But deep down, somewhere beneath all that calm I was trying so hard to wear, I knew the truth was not gentle. Not after 4 years. Not after Tessa had built a throne out of my silence and convinced everyone I was the stranger in my own family. The drive from Charleston to Beaufort felt longer than it should have. I passed marsh grass bending in the wind, little white churches, roadside produce stands, and stretches of water shining under the afternoon sun. Everything looked familiar and foreign at the same time. I had grown up on those roads. I knew the smell of that air, thick with salt and heat. But I was not the same girl who had left with 2 suitcases and a scholarship letter. That girl had wanted to be noticed. The woman driving that rental car just wanted to stop being erased. When I pulled into the parking lot of Ellis Harbor Grill, every space was full. Cars lined the street, and silver balloons were tied to the porch railing. Through the big front windows, I could see people moving around inside, laughing, hugging, balancing paper plates piled with shrimp, hush puppies, and cake. The restaurant looked better than it had in years. The roof was new. The sign had been repainted. Warm lights glowed over the dining room, making everything look golden and alive. For a second, I felt proud. Then I remembered that everyone inside thought Tessa was the reason it still stood. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes, holding the box in my lap. My phone buzzed once. A text from Tessa. "Don't do this." That was all it said. I looked at those 3 words and almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because after everything she had done, she still thought she could command the ending. I turned my phone face down, picked up the box, and got out of the car. The moment I opened the restaurant door, the sound changed. It did not stop all at once. It faded in layers. First, my cousin Paige saw me near the host stand. Her smile dropped. Then Aunt Denise turned around with a serving spoon in her hand. Then Uncle Calvin saw me from beside the drink table, and his eyes went straight to the box. He did not look surprised. He looked ready. Across the room, my sister was standing beside our parents with a microphone in one hand and a champagne glass in the other. She was wearing a pale blue dress that matched the decorations, her hair swept over one shoulder, her smile bright enough to fool anyone who had never been burned by it. She was in the middle of a toast. "And I just want Mom and Dad to know," Tessa said, her voice soft and emotional, "that everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was because family comes first." People clapped. My mother wiped her eyes. My father reached over and squeezed Tessa's shoulder. Then Tessa saw me. The smile stayed on her face, but her eyes changed. They sharpened. She lowered the microphone and walked toward me slowly, like she was trying not to look rushed in front of the room. When she reached me, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear her. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "I brought Mom and Dad a gift." Her eyes flicked to the box. "You need to leave." "No." "Mara, I'm serious." "So am I." By then, my mother had noticed me. She was sitting at the front table beside Dad, wearing a navy dress and pearl earrings I recognized from my childhood. Her face went pale, and for half a second, I saw something like guilt pass through her eyes. Then she looked at Tessa, and the guilt disappeared behind fear. Dad turned next. Raymond Ellis had always seemed huge to me when I was little. That day, he looked older, heavier, tired around the mouth. But the disappointment in his eyes was just as strong as ever. I walked toward them. Every step felt loud. The whole restaurant had gone quiet now, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fans and someone's fork clinking against a plate. Happy anniversary, I said. Mom pressed her napkin between her fingers. Mara, she said, her voice small, we didn't ask you to come. The words hit me in front of everyone. Cousins, neighbors, staff, old family friends. People who had watched me grow up wiping tables while Tessa told jokes by the register. I know, I said, but I'm your daughter. Dad stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. You don't get to disappear for years and then walk in here holding a box like that fixes anything. I felt Tessa behind me before I saw her. She had taken her place near Dad's shoulder, exactly where she wanted to be. I didn't disappear, I said. Dad pointed toward Tessa. Your sister stayed. Your sister helped. Your sister saved this restaurant when we were drowning. Tessa lowered her eyes like she was too humble to accept the praise. I almost admired the performance. Almost. I stepped forward and placed the navy blue box on the table between my parents, right beside the anniversary cake with silver frosting flowers. Then open it, I said. For 1 second, no one moved. Dad stared at the box like it insulted him just by being there. Then his jaw tightened. He picked it up, turned toward the trash can beside the table, and dropped it in. The sound was small, a dull thud against paper plates and napkins. But inside me, something broke cleanly. A few people gasped. Aunt Denise whispered, Raymond. Mom covered her mouth. Uncle Calvin took 1 step forward, but I raised my hand just slightly. Not yet. Dad looked at me with anger burning through his shame. We don't need guilt wrapped in ribbon. I walked to the trash can, bent down, and pulled the box out. The silver ribbon had sauce on it now. One corner was bent. I wiped it with my sleeve as slowly as I could because if I moved too fast, I thought I might fall apart. Then I looked at my father. I spent 4 years earning what's inside this box, I said, but I won't beg you to value it. Nobody spoke. I turned toward the door. My legs felt numb, but somehow they carried me. I passed tables of relatives who would not look me in the eye. I passed the wall where old photographs of the restaurant hung, including one of me at 12 years old, standing beside Dad with flour on my shirt and hope all over my face. At the door, Uncle Calvin stepped in front of me. His voice was low. Leave it with me. I looked at the box in my hands. Everything in me wanted to take it back to Seattle, shove it in a closet, and let them live with the lie they had chosen. But Calvin's eyes were steady. Please, Mara, he said. Let the truth stay in the room, even if you don't. So I handed him the box. Then I walked out into the humid Carolina evening and drove away without looking back. I was halfway to Charleston when my phone started buzzing. Dad, then Mom, then Dad again, then Aunt Denise, then Paige, then numbers I didn't recognize. I turned the phone off before the tears finally came. I didn't see what happened after I left. Uncle Calvin told me later. He said Tessa tried to save the party first. She clapped her hands and said, Okay, everyone, let's not let Mara's drama ruin Mom and Dad's night. That was when Calvin walked to the center of the room, placed the stained navy blue box back on the table and said, Before anyone eats that cake, you all need to know what Raymond just threw away. Tessa told him to stop. He didn't. He opened the box, took out the loan satisfaction letter, the lien release, the tax receipts, and 4 years of payment records. Then he read the first page out loud. Final payment received from Mara Ellis. Total paid $94,680. The room went dead silent. Calvin held up the records. Every payment came from Mara's account in Seattle. Every month for 4 years. Mom sat down like her body had forgotten how to stand. Dad stared at the papers like they were written in another language. Then Calvin pulled out one more folder, the one I hadn't even known he had brought. Emails showing Tessa had been talking to a developer about selling the back lot behind the restaurant, the land where my parents' house stood. That was when Dad finally looked at Tessa. Not like a proud father, like a man seeing a stranger. Tessa started crying, saying she had only been trying to help, but nobody moved toward her. Nobody defended her. The room that had praised her 10 minutes earlier turned cold around her. And then Mom opened my letter. She read it through tears, stopping at the line that said, I never needed applause. I only needed to know that if I came home, there would still be a chair for me. Uncle Calvin told me that was when my father broke. He sat down, covered his face with both hands, and cried in front of everyone. By the time I reached the airport, I had 73 missed calls, but I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I let them sit with my silence. I landed in Seattle a little after 1 in the morning, exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Noah was waiting outside baggage claim with his coat zipped to his chin and 2 coffees in his hands, one of them already cooling because he knew I would be too tired to ask for anything. When he saw my face, he didn't ask how it went. That was one of the reasons I loved him. He could read grief without making it perform. He took my suitcase, wrapped one arm around my shoulders, and walked me to the car like I might come apart if the wind touched me too hard. I kept my phone off the entire drive home. I knew there were messages waiting. I knew my parents had probably called. I knew the truth had finally exploded in that restaurant, scattering pieces of itself across every table, every plate, every person who had ever believed Tessa over me. But I couldn't face any of it yet. For 4 years, I had carried the weight quietly. That night, I needed the silence to belong to me. When we got home, I sat on the couch without taking off my shoes. Noah put a blanket around my shoulders and disappeared into the kitchen. I heard the kettle click on. I heard rain tapping against the window. I heard the familiar hum of our refrigerator, the kind of small, ordinary sound that somehow makes heartbreak feel even bigger. Then, all at once, I broke. Not gently, not beautifully. I bent forward, pressed both hands over my mouth, and cried so hard my chest hurt. I cried for the little girl who wiped tables while her sister got praised for smiling. I cried for the woman who worked extra shifts until her legs trembled, only to be called absent by the people she was saving. I cried because my father had dropped that box into the trash like it meant nothing, like I meant nothing. Noah sat beside me, placed one hand on my back, and said nothing. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed, and sometimes staying is the only thing strong enough to hold a person together. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a sore throat and swollen eyes. My phone was still off on the coffee table. For a few minutes, I just stared at it. I knew turning it on would bring the world crashing back in. But avoiding the truth had already cost me too much, so I picked it up and held the power button. The screen lit up. 73 missed calls. 31 text messages, voicemails from Mom, Dad, Uncle Calvin, Aunt Denise, Cousin Paige, even people from Beaufort I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't open any of them. I set the phone down, made coffee, and stepped onto the balcony in my old sweatshirt and bare feet, letting the cold Seattle morning bite at my skin. For once, I didn't want to be warm. I wanted to feel something simple. At 8:42 a.m., someone knocked on my door. Noah looked at me from the kitchen. I looked at the door. Nobody in Seattle knocked like that. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then one more, like the person on the other side was afraid of being answered. I already knew before I opened it. My parents were standing in the hallway. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in the same navy coat she had worn at the anniversary party, her eyes red and tired. My father stood beside her in yesterday's shirt, his hair flattened on one side, his face gray with exhaustion. In my mother's arms was the navy blue box. The ribbon had been replaced, carefully tied, though one corner of the box was still bent. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Dad spoke. His voice sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. "Mara," he said, "I threw away the only gift that ever mattered." I gripped the doorframe because my knees went weak. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." 3 words. Simple words. Words I had waited my whole life to hear from him. But when they finally came, they didn't erase the years. They didn't undo the silence, the missed birthdays, the public humiliation, the way he had looked at Tessa with pride and at me with suspicion. They just stood there between us, small and shaking, asking if I would let them become the beginning of something. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. We sat at my kitchen table, the cheap round one Noah and I bought secondhand when we first moved in together. Mom kept both hands around her coffee mug but didn't drink. Dad stared at the box like it might accuse him if he looked away. Noah quietly said hello, squeezed my shoulder, and went into the bedroom to give us privacy. I loved him even more for that. Mom was the first to speak. "I knew," she whispered. I looked at her. She started crying before she could explain. Not everything. Not the payments, not the amount, but I knew something didn't make sense. Tessa said she was sacrificing everything, but she was always buying things. New dresses, new phone, trips to Charleston, and every time I asked, she made me feel guilty for questioning her. She wiped her cheeks with both hands. I should have asked you. I should have called you. I should have been your mother. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Calvin showed me the records. Every page. His voice cracked. Every month, your name was there, and I kept saying you left us. You made it easy to believe that, I said quietly. He nodded. No defense. No anger. Just a tired, broken nod. I did. That was when I said the thing I had been carrying longer than the debt itself. I love you both, but I will not go back to being invisible. Mom nodded quickly, crying harder. I kept going because if I stopped, I knew I might lose my courage. You don't get to let Tessa decide whether I belong in this family. You don't get to hear things about me and never ask if they're true. You don't get to ignore me for years and then show up only because the truth embarrassed you in public. Dad looked down at his hands. You're right. I need calls because you want to know me, not because you feel guilty. I need honesty. I need boundaries. And I need you to understand that forgiveness is not the same as pretending it didn't happen. For a while, the only sound was the rain against the window. Then Dad said, Tessa is off the business account. As of this morning, Calvin is helping me get an attorney to look through everything she touched. Mom added, she left town last night, sent a message saying we betrayed her. I almost laughed, but nothing about it was funny. Of course she did. Dad looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in my adult life. I don't know how to fix what I did. You don't fix it with one apology, I said. You fix it by showing up differently, again and again. Before they left, Dad stood near the door holding the box. His hands trembled slightly. Can I hug you? He asked. That question mattered, because for once, he didn't assume I owed him comfort. I stood there for a moment, looking at the man who had hurt me, the man who had driven through the night to face what he had done, the man who finally seemed smaller than his pride. Then I stepped forward and let him hug me. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It was a door left open. And sometimes that is all healing can be at the beginning. That was 6 months ago. Dad calls every Sunday now at 7. Sometimes we talk for an hour. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes about rain, restaurant repairs, or what Noah is building in the garage. But he calls. Mom sends handwritten letters with recipes tucked inside. Last month, she mailed me the faded blue ribbon from her wedding bouquet with a note that said, "You remembered what I forgot to honor." As for Tessa, I haven't spoken to her. I didn't block her. I simply stopped chasing someone who only knew how to stand tall by pushing me down. People ask if I regret paying all that money. Some days I do. I think about what $94,000 could have done for my own life. But then I remember something important. The money didn't buy my parents' love. It bought the truth away into the room. And when the truth finally entered, it didn't whisper. It spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. So, if you've ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the person giving everything while someone else takes the credit, please remember this. Being silent doesn't mean being weak. But there comes a day when your silence has protected the wrong people long enough. And when that day comes, don't be afraid to let the truth stay in the room. Thank you so much for listening to this story until the very end. If Mara's journey touched your heart, let me know in the comments what you would have done in her place. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you never miss a new story, and share this with someone who loves emotional family dramas. Thank you for staying with us, and I'll see you in the next story.